building on strengths, that targeted instruction, it just is a win-win for everyone involved.
Finally, you will want to provide teachers with professional learning experiences on how to run a successful blended course. Professional learning should be ongoing, and checkpoints should be built in along the way to assess the effectiveness of the program and to identify areas of growth. Make sure that time is set aside to reflect on the data collected from the checkpoints. This is a critical step to ensure everyone remains calibrated and instruction remains aligned. Do you feel like there should be isolated, or campuses should set up isolated professional learning experiences for teachers to give them time to collaborate and work together?
Well, definitely, absolutely. And one of the earlier questions had to do with what advice would you give, to a campus or a district starting a blended program, and that would be a component that definitely I would advise that you do build your team, and within that team there is specific type of professional learning that is directly going to impact the blended team, because it is a different animal than the traditional classroom for many reasons, and a lot of them we've discussed on camera today. But because it's a special venue for learning, then there is a need for a specialized professional learning, and that just helps calibrate your program and infuse it with those standards that you want to see for success across the board.
Before you begin designing your Stage 3 course content, you should do inventory on what content you already have. Course materials should be organized by the scope and sequence in which you plan to teach. If you are starting from scratch, there are different ways to collect materials. One way is to purchase content already put together and adapt the materials to meet the needs of your students. You can also curate content by piecing together various resources on the web. Make sure that when you are designing the online lessons, you will want to avoid turning the online portion of the class into a collection of lecture-style training videos. Whether you are a new teacher or a seasoned teacher, classroom management is always one of those top priorities to ensure a safe and functional learning environment. One of the #1 questions I get asked is, how is classroom management impacted by the blended learning model? Let's listen to a teacher and a student's perspective to get a better picture of what you might expect when moving to this model. Student engagement and classroom management is usually a hot topic for educators. Can you tell me, have you noticed, just from a student's perspective, is there an increased engagement in this blended learning model? And then also discipline. Do you see a lot of increased discipline issues or decrease?
Right. So the cool thing about the blended lab is you're kind of giving students what they want. It's like an at-home-like environment. It's not your typical, everyone sit up straight in a desk and stare at the board. So I feel like students in my classes are much more comfortable in the blended lab anyway. So that gives them the opportunity to kind of do work in a way that they want, which perpetuates better behavior. So, when discipline issues come up in the classroom, they're seen a little bit as less severe in the blended lab because students are more comfortable, In our lab, I know we have a coffee stand and comfortable couches and such, so students feel more at home, and when that environment is more prominent in school, I feel like students are more willing to do their work and get it done. I mean, it's almost completely quiet whenever we're in, you can use headphones, you can listen to any music you want. It's just about that environment that's created that makes students more comfortable and more willing to do their work.
Do y'all have a set of rules or expectations, and what does that look like?
Right. So the blended lab facilitator is someone who kind of sets that. I imagine it would vary with if we had multiple different ones. We have 2, and it typically runs, don't bring your own food and get crumbs everywhere because, that's an issue, cleanliness. Getting up and down, horseplay obviously is not allowed. So rules of a typical classroom may apply. It, I imagine, depends on the teacher's preference. So it's similar rules, but at the same time, students are getting more opportunities.
What does classroom management look like in a blended learning model? I know that that's always a hot topic for if you're a new teacher or even a seasoned teacher, classroom management in general. But how does this look with a blended model?
I would say it's a little more challenging than a traditional model because you do have that high dependence on technology. So again, going back to effective teaching practices, that's what you set up from the very beginning. So there's a protocol that is in place, and you practice, and you guide, and you instruct, and you intervene, and you set expectations, and it's the same as a regular classroom. It's just with the technology, and of course here, since we're one-to-one, we've kind of had that learning curve over the last 3 years. So it's not as difficult this year as it was the first year that we had one-to-one, because the kids have gotten into that practice of how to use technology. Not all the time, perfectly, but it's a little more challenging, but with good, effective teaching practices of setting requirements, and then setting your expectations, and then following through, doing intervention. It really works out, I think, to be beneficial to the kids. So it's a little bit of a challenge, but not any more so than any campus with one-to-one, I think, would face.
We have heard from a student and a teacher about classroom management, but I also want to equip you with the tools to get started. At the end of this module, you will find some great resources to glean from. I encourage you to take pieces from the resources and tailor it to meet your needs. Building in formative assessments into your lesson design, rather than summative-only assessments, will allow you to measure what the students know or may have missed in order to determine your next steps in planning. I have provided some formative assessment resources at the end of this module so that you can further your learning on this topic if needed. I want to end this module with expressing the importance of building community. The blended learning model allows you to remove the borders of the classroom and extend into the community and even into the world. You will want to design lessons to support community and global connections. Ask yourself, how can this model make the impossible possible in my learning environment? This model allows students to collaborate with and share resources to really deepen their learning of the objective. Can you imagine being 15 years old and having a passion for the medical world? And just by a click of the button, you're able to Skype or Google Hangout with a doctor in your community or even in another country? The sky's the limit when lessons are designed with purpose and intentionality. So in your classroom, do you use technology to connect to global, to the world or to the community? Are there any times where you can use technology for that in this blended environment?
With AP Hug, it's all about human interactions on the world, and we definitely have to be able to connect our learning curriculum to what's going to happen globally. So any scenario that we have to be able to relate it back to reality. So we pull articles from the internet, we pull news things that happen all the time, and we have to connect it to how that might impact us in the future and what it's going to teach us at the current point that we're learning at.
Yeah, and in my blended science class, we actually use technology to connect with other people often. We do discussion posts on education forums, and they're often worldwide because we can see discussion posts from people from around the world. And we love doing interactions with middle school and elementary school kids because our content is very fundamental, you could say, so it's easy to make it in a way that other kids can understand. So we often Skype them and talk about when we can meet and hang out and teach them lessons, and it's really fun.
Can you give me an example of maybe one of those lessons that you connected with an elementary school?
Sure. Yeah. Well, recently we went over to Pinkerton Elementary and we taught them about various aspects of the stars and space and stuff. My team had constellations, so we used technology to connect with their teachers and find out what they wanted to learn, so we could base our lessons around that. and we FaceTimed them, and then we went over one day and we just stayed there for 2 or 3 hours, and we had rotating stations and we taught them, and it was really fun because they enjoyed it and it was an experience for us, and I loved it.
So you took the blended learning into the elementary
Precisely,
with
yeah.
those rotations and stuff. Very neat. In comparison to a traditional course, do you feel like the blended learning model helps you to be future ready?
I think that with the technology aspect, we are able to interact more with what our job environment might look like in the future, and we get tidbits of how we have to act in an environment like that and how we should keep our work ethics at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. There's like less teacher rules, and like there's no one to monitor you, and you're on your own, so you got to get your work done and you got to behave while doing it. And I think that's what the future's going to be like. And whether it be college or work, you have to set your own rules and your limits and know what to do and when to do it. And this gives us a good way to practice that.